This is the story of King Midas and the Golden Touch.
Long, long ago, in a faraway land in ancient Greece, there lived a wealthy king whose name was Midas. King Midas was more fond of gold than of anything else in the world. It so happened that King Midas had a precious little daughter, whom we shall call Marigold. If he loved anything better, or half so well, it was the one little maiden who played so merrily around her father's footstool. However, the more Midas loved his daughter, the more did he desire and seek for wealth. For this king was under the firm belief that the very best thing he could possibly do for this dear child
Would be to bequeath her the largest pile of golden glistening coins
that had ever been heaped together since the world was made. The thought of gold had consumed Midas, and if ever he happened to gaze for an instant at the gold-tinted clouds of sunset, he wished and imagined that it was real gold, and that the clouds could be squeezed safely from the sky and added to his collection. When little Marigold ran to meet him, carrying a freshly picked bunch of buttercups and dandelions, he would always say, "Dear child, if only you had picked flowers of real gold, then they would really be worth the plucking." At length, Midas had become so exceedingly unreasonable that he could scarcely bear to see or touch any object that was not made of the purest of gold. Choosing to spend most of his time solitarily hunched over, counting his wealth in the deepest, darkest room of his palace, although little more than a dungeon, Midas would carefully lock the door, take his gold to the one corner of the room in which one bright and narrow sunbeam fell from the dungeon-like window. Hours of marveling would pass, and the king would whisper to himself, "O Midas, rich King Midas,
What a happy man thou art!" But as much as he would call himself a happy man, Midas felt that unless the whole world would become his very own treasure room and be filled with gold at every turn, he would not be quite as happy as he might be.
One day, Midas was enjoying himself in his locked treasure room as usual, when he perceived a shadow fall over the heaps of gold. To his bewilderment, he looked up to behold the figure of a stranger standing in the bright and narrow sunbeam. It was a young man with a smile that filled the room with a kind of golden radiance. The stranger gazed about the room, and when his lustrous smile had glistened upon all the golden objects that there were, he turned his gaze once more to Midas.
"You are a wealthy man, friend Midas,"
he observed.
"I doubt whether any other place on earth contains so much gold as you have contrived to pile up in this room."
"I've done well," Pretty well, said Midas in a discontented tone.
Then you are not satisfied?
Exclaimed the stranger. Midas shook his head.
And pray, what would satisfy you?
Asked the stranger. After a pause in thought, Midas raised his head and looked the lustrous stranger in the face.
Well, Midas, I see that you have at length hit upon something that will satisfy you.
Observed his visitor.
Now tell me your wish.
It is only this, replied Midas. I wish everything that I touch to be changed to gold. The stranger's smile grew so very broad that it seemed to fill the room like the outburst of the sun gleaming into the shadowy cell.
The golden touch!
Exclaimed he.
You certainly deserve credit, friend Midas, for striking out so brilliant a conception. But are you quite sure that this will satisfy you?
How could it fail? Said Midas.
And will you never regret the possession of it?
What could induce me? Asked Midas. Nothing else would render me perfectly happy.
Be it as you wish, then,
replied the stranger, waving his hand in a token of farewell.
Tomorrow at dawn, you will find yourself gifted with the golden touch.
The figure of the stranger then became exceedingly bright and disappeared with the beam of sunlight. Day had hardly peeped over the hills when King Midas was wide awake and stretching his arms out of bed. The earliest sunbeam shone through the window and gilded the ceiling over his head. Midas started up in a kind of joyful frenzy. He seized one of the bedposts, and it immediately became a fluted golden pillar. He took up a book from the table. At his first touch, it became a heavy bundle of thin golden plates, in which all the wisdom of the book had grown illegible. He hurriedly put on his clothes and was enraptured to see himself in a magnificent suit of golden cloth, which retained its flexibility and softness, although it burdened him a little with its weight.
Midas now took his spectacles from his pocket, but to his great perplexity, he could no longer see through them, for the transparent crystals had turned into plates of gold, valuable as treasure, but worthless as spectacles.
Wise King Midas was so exalted by his good fortune that the palace no longer seemed sufficiently spacious to contain him. Emerging into the garden, he found a great number of beautiful roses in full bloom. Very delicious was their fragrance in the morning breeze. Their delicate blush was one of the fairest sights in the world. But Midas knew a way to make them far more precious. Going from bush to bush, he exercised his magical touch until every individual flower and bud were changed to gold. By the time his good work was completed,
King Midas was summoned to breakfast.
Little Marigold had not yet made her appearance. It was not a great while before he heard her coming along the passageway, crying bitterly. This circumstance surprised him, for Marigold was one of the most cheerful little people whom you could ever see on a summer's day, and hardly ever shed so much as a thimble of tears. Marigold slowly and disconsolately opened the door and showed herself with her apron in her eyes, still sobbing as though her heart would break. "How now, my little lady?" cried Midas. "Pray, what is the matter with you this bright morning?"
Without so much as removing the apron from her eyes, Marigold held out a golden rose. "Why, it's exquisite, my child. What is it in this magnificent rose to make you cry?"
The roses are no longer beautiful like before. The roses that we loved so much for their fragrance and blush now are hard, blighted, and spoiled.
Marigold, my precious girl, pray don't cry about it, child,
said Midas, who was ashamed to admit that he himself had changed every single flower into gold. My child, an ordinary rose would wither in a day, but this one holds its value until the end of time.
Father, I do not care for riches such as this, exclaimed Marigold. It has no smell, and the hard petals prick my nose.
At this, Marigold sat down at the table, with tears still rolling down her cheeks.
Midas, meanwhile, had poured out a cup of coffee, and as a matter of course, the coffee pot, whatever metal it may have been when he took it up, was gold when he set it down. He lifted a spoonful of coffee to his lips, and, upon sipping it, was astonished to perceive that the instant it hit his lips, it became molten gold, and then instantly hardened into a lump. "Huh!" exclaimed Midas, rather aghast. "What is the matter, father?" asked little Marigold, gazing at him with the tears still standing in her eyes. Nothing, child, never mind," said Midas. "Drink your milk before it gets quite cold." In fact, his entire breakfast turned metallic, and looked as if it had been very cunningly made by the finest goldsmith. A very pretty piece of work, as you may suppose, only King Midas, just at that moment, would much rather have had a real meal on his dish than this elaborate and valuable imitation of one. "Well, this is a quandary. I don't quite see how I am to get any breakfast," he thought to himself, leaning back in his chair and looking quite enviously at little Marigold, who still had her bread and milk laid before her. Such a costly breakfast before me, and nothing can be eaten." Hoping that, by dint of great dispatch, he might avoid what he now felt to be considerable inconvenience, King Midas next snatched a hot potato and attempted to cram it in his mouth and swallow it in a hurry. But the golden touch was too nimble for him. He found his mouth full, not of mealy potato, but of solid metal, which so burnt his tongue that he roared loud, and jumping up from the table, began to dance and stamp about the room with pain. "Dear father," cried Marigold, "pray what is the matter? Have you burnt your mouth?" "Dear child," groaned Midas dolefully, "I don't know what is to become of your poor father." Midas was excessively hungry. Would he be less so by supper time? How many days, think you, would he survive a continuance of this rich fare? He began to doubt whether, after all, riches are the one desirable thing in the world. But this was only a passing thought. So fascinated was Midas with the glitter of the yellow metal that he would still have refused to give up the golden touch for so paltry a consideration as a breakfast. Nevertheless, so great was his hunger and the perplexity of his situation that he again groaned aloud, and very grievously too. Our pretty little Marigold could endure it no longer. She sat a moment, gazing at her father and trying with all her might of her little wits to find out what was the matter with him. Then, a sweet and sorrowful impulse to comfort him, she started from her chair, ran to her father, and threw her little arms affectionately about his knees. He bent down and kissed her. He felt that his little daughter's love was worth 1,000 times more than he had gained by the golden touch. "My precious, precious Marigold," cried he. But Marigold had made no answer. Alas, what had he done? How fatal was the gift which the stranger bestowed! The moment the lips of Midas touched Marigold's forehead, a change had taken place. Her sweet, rosy face, so full of affection as it had been, assumed a glittering yellow colour. Her beautiful brown ringlets took the same tint. Her soft and tender little form grew hard and inflexible within her father's encircling arms. The victim of his insatiable desire for wealth, little Marigold was a human child no longer, but a golden statue. Yes, there she was, with a questioning look of love, grief, and pity hardened into her face. All the features and tokens of Marigold were there. Even the beloved little dimple remained in her golden chin. But the more perfect was the resemblance, the greater was the father's agony at beholding what was left of his daughter.
While Midas was in this tumult of despair, a familiar figure appeared in the corner of the room. Without so much as a word, Midas bent down his head, for he recognized that this figure was the exact same stranger who had bestowed upon him this curse.
"Well, well, friend Midas,"
said the stranger.
"Pray, how do you succeed with the golden touch?"
Midas shook his head. "I am very miserable," said he.
"Very miserable indeed,"
exclaimed the stranger.
"Have I not faithfully kept my promise with you? Have you not acquired everything that your heart desired?"
"Gold is not everything," answered Midas, "and I have lost all that my heart truly cared for."
"Ah, so you have made a discovery since yesterday,"
observed the stranger.
"Let us see then. Which of these two things do you think is really worth the most? The gift of a golden touch, or 1 cup of clear cold water?"
"Oh, blessed water!" exclaimed Midas. "It will never moisten my parched throat again."
"The golden touch?"
continued the stranger.
"Or a crust of bread?"
Bread is worth all the gold on earth.
"The golden touch? Or your own little Marigold, warm, soft, and loving as she was just an hour ago?"
Oh, my child, my dear, dear child.
My little child is worth all the treasures in the whole world.
"You are wiser than you were, King Midas. Your own heart, I perceive, has not yet been entirely changed from flesh to gold. Were it so, then your case would be hopeless. But it seems that you are still capable of understanding that the most simple things in life are worth more than mountains of gold. Tell me, Midas, do you sincerely desire to rid yourself of this golden touch?"
said the stranger, looking seriously at him. "It is hateful to me," replied Midas.
"Go then,"
said the stranger,
"and plunge into the river that lies at the bottom of your garden. Take likewise a vase of the same water, and sprinkle it over any object that you desire to change back again from gold into its former substance. If you do this in earnestness and sincerity, it may possibly repair the mischief which your avarice has occasioned."
King Midas bowed low, and when he lifted his head, the lustrous stranger had vanished. Midas lost no time in snatching up a great earthen pitcher and hastened to the riverside. On reaching the river's bank, he plunged headlong in without waiting so much as to pull off his shoes. He then dipped the pitcher into the water. It gladdened his very heart to see the change from gold into the same good, honest earthen vessel which it had been before he touched it. He was conscious also of a change within himself. A cold, hard, and heavy-weighted heart was slowly softening back again into flesh. The curse of the golden touch had been lifted. King Midas hastened back to the palace with his earthen pitcher filled with river water. The first thing he did, as you need hardly be told, was sprinkle it by handfuls over the golden figure of little Marigold. No sooner did the first drop fall on her hair did she transform back into the rosy-cheeked child that Midas loved so very much. He hugged her and kissed her forehead with such relief.
She looked up at her father with such delight, and King Midas thought to himself, "From this day forth, I shall cease to value the sight of any gold, save this little precious jewel before me." The end.